The event was supposed to be routine, one of those state-level healthcare compliance mixers where everyone pretends they're relaxed while checking name badges and scanning the room for people who matter. I showed up in uniform-adjacent attire. Nothing flashy. Nothing that invited questions. Clean lines, neutral colors. The kind of outfit that lets you move through a room without becoming a conversation. I wasn't there to socialize. I had a short list of people I needed to speak with, a time window, and an exit plan. That was it. I was halfway through a conversation about audit timelines when I heard my name. Not the professional version, the family version. Madison. I turned. My sister stood a few feet away, already smiling like she'd spotted something unexpected on a clearance rack. She looked polished, hair done, dress expensive enough to announce it. She had that look she always wore when she thought she was winning. Behind her were our parents, hovering just close enough to be seen, not close enough to intervene. They were dressed the same way they always were at events like this, comfortable, confident, already sure they belonged. I hadn't seen them in years. "Wow," my sister said, eyes flicking over me. "I didn't know you came to things like this." I gave a polite nod. I had a reason. She laughed like that was the joke. "Still doing the coding job." She said it loudly enough for the people near us to hear. The word coding landed with quotation marks you could hear. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not anger, recognition. "Yes," I said. "I work in cybersecurity." She tilted her head. "So, computers." Our parents watched. No correction, no discomfort, just quiet approval, the kind that says let her talk. Before I could respond, my sister shifted to the man standing beside her and looped an arm through his. "This is my fiancé," she said. "He just started at a tech company. Big one." He stepped forward, hand out, confident, in the way people get when they think they're about to be helpful. "Nice to meet you," he said. "I'm on the integration side. Hospitals, clinics, that sort of thing." I shook his hand. "Madison." He nodded. "So you're in tech support." My sister smiled wider. She's always been good with computers. It's kind of her thing. I let the moment sit. People nearby had gone quiet the way they do when they sense a small spectacle forming. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "we're actually hiring. A lot of entry-level roles right now. Support work, troubleshooting, cabling in new wings. It's solid experience." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "I could pass your name along," he continued. "Get you an interview. It's not glamorous, but it's a foot in the door." My sister watched my face like she expected a gratitude. "Honestly," she added, "it's nice when family helps family." I took the card. The logo was clean, minimal, familiar in a way that made my stomach settle instead of drop. "Thanks," I said. Her fiancé nodded, satisfied. "Dress professionally if you come in. First impressions matter." One of my parents shifted slightly, like they were pleased something had been handled. "You really should consider it," my mother said. "Stability is important." I looked at her. "I have stability." She smiled thinly. "Of course you do." The conversation moved on without me. That's how it always worked. My sister turned to someone else. My father started talking about clinic expansions. The room swallowed them back into its noise. I stood there with the card in my hand. The irony didn't make me smile. It didn't need to. I excused myself and walked toward the refreshment table, where a few people were clustered around coffee cups and pastries no one planned to eat. My breathing was steady. My pulse was normal. This wasn't new territory. Behind me, I heard my sister's voice again, lower this time. "I told you she'd be here. She likes this stuff." Her fiancé chuckled. "Everyone likes to feel important." I set the card down on the table, logo facing up. A few minutes later, I felt someone step into my peripheral vision. Not close enough to intrude. Close enough to signal intent. "Madison Turner," a man asked. I turned. He wore a dark suit, no badge visible, posture relaxed in a way that came from authority, not comfort. "Yes." He smiled. "Good. I was hoping to run into you before things got busy." He extended his hand. "We finalized the review this morning. Everything checked out." I shook his hand. "Glad to hear it." He glanced around the room. "I'll need you for 5 minutes later, just to confirm next steps." "Of course." He nodded and stepped away, already being intercepted by someone else. I felt eyes on me. My sister had stopped talking mid-sentence. Her fiancé's expression had shifted from polite boredom to calculation. My parents were watching now, their attention sharpened. Her fiancé frowned and pulled out his phone. Who was that? Someone I work with, I said. He tapped his screen. What was your last name again? Turner. He typed, paused, cleared the search, typed again slower. My sister leaned in. What are you doing? Just checking something. He frowned harder, then adjusted his filters. His thumb hovered, then scrolled. The color drained from his face in stages. Not all at once, piece by piece. My sister laughed nervously. What? He didn't answer. He turned the screen slightly away, then back like he was hoping the image would change. It didn't. He looked up at me. This isn't funny. I'm not joking, I said. My father stepped closer. What's going on? Her fiancé swallowed. The founder listed here. The owner. He stopped himself. My sister shook her head. That can't be right. I folded my hands loosely in front of me. The room felt quieter, but nothing had actually changed. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed nearby. The man from earlier reappeared at my side right on time. Madison, he said, voice clear. We're ready when you are. I nodded. I'll be there in a moment. He glanced at the small cluster around us, then back at me. Good to see you. As he walked away, my sister stared at me like she was waiting for a punchline that wasn't coming. Her fiancé's phone slipped a little in his hand. He tightened his grip. I picked up the business card from the table and turned it over once, just to be sure. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. I slid the business card back into my pocket and stayed where I was, letting the noise of the room pass around me without stepping into it. My sister was still staring, waiting for me to say something dramatic, something she could recognize. I didn't. I'd learned a long time ago that silence unsettles people more than explanations. That lesson started early. Our house was attached to the clinic. Not metaphorically, physically. One door separated the waiting room from our living space. Patients walked past our windows all day. Phones rang constantly, clipboards stacked up on the counter like they belonged there more than we did. From the outside, it looked impressive. Inside it felt like a workplace that happened to have beds. My parents loved that arrangement. It made everything feel important. By the time I was old enough to reach the desk, I was already useful. Not to the family, to the clinic. When a computer froze, someone would call my name. When the printer jammed, I was expected to fix it. When they upgraded the system, I ran cables, set up terminals, and figured out why nothing talked to anything else. I didn't get paid. I didn't get thanked. It was treated like a chore I happened to be good at. No one ever asked how I learned it. At dinner, the conversations never changed. Medical school rankings, residency placements. Which specialist had the most influence? Which hospital board mattered? My sister sat at the center of all of it, nodding along like the future was already written in ink. When she said she wanted to be a doctor, it was treated like confirmation, not ambition. When I talked about computers, the room went quiet in a specific way. Not awkward, dismissive. Someone would change the subject. My mother would smile and say, "It's good to have hobbies." My father would add, "You'll grow out of it." I never did. What I did grow into was awareness. I noticed how quickly my sister's mistakes were explained away. How easily her achievements were inflated. If she forgot something, it was because she was busy. If I made an error, it was because I wasn't focused. The rules weren't hidden. They were consistent. By middle school, I stopped trying to impress anyone at home. I focused on things that didn't require approval. Code did what it was told. Systems either worked or they didn't. There was comfort in that. No favoritism, no tone of voice, just logic. The clinic benefited from that more than they ever admitted. I cleaned malware off machines that shouldn't have been online in the first place. I locked down terminals after someone left patient records open overnight. I fixed network drops caused by equipment that had never been installed correctly. Every problem I solved quietly prevented something worse. No one noticed it. That was fine. What wasn't fine was the assumption that I owed it to them. By high school, it was expected. If something broke, it was my responsibility. Not because I worked there, because I lived there. If I tried to say no, my father would look at me like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. "You're good at this," he'd say. "Why make it difficult?" That sentence followed me for years. My sister didn't have chores like that. She studied. She shadowed doctors. She talked about her future. I was already working in mine, even if no one called it that. When she needed help, it was because she was overwhelmed. When I needed time, it was because I was being difficult. There was never a conversation about options. The path was assumed. She would inherit the clinic. I would orbit it. Useful, but replaceable. I learned early not to expect fairness, but that didn't stop the frustration from building. It just taught me how to store it somewhere quiet. By 17, I had my own projects. Nothing flashy, nothing anyone at home cared about. I spent nights refining code, breaking it, rebuilding it cleaner. I learned what didn't scale. I learned what failed under pressure. I learned how small mistakes multiplied when people ignored them. Those lessons didn't come from textbooks. They came from watching adults ignore problems because fixing them wasn't prestigious. At home, my sister's acceptance letters were framed before she even decided where to go. Lawyers were consulted. Ownership paperwork was discussed like it was dinner conversation. I wasn't part of those talks. I wasn't meant to be. When relatives visited, they asked her about her plans. They asked me if I was still into computers. I answered politely. There was no point correcting anyone. The narrative was set. I stopped arguing because arguing required the other side to listen. What I didn't stop doing was preparing. By the time I turned 18, I knew exactly where I stood. Not just in the family. In the hierarchy they'd built around themselves. I was background infrastructure. Necessary when things broke. Invisible when they worked. The night my sister teased me about my little tech projects in front of guests, everyone laughed. Not cruelly. Casually. Like it was obvious. My mother patted my arm and said, "You'll find your place." I already had. It just wasn't there. Standing in that ballroom years later, with the hum of conversation brushing past me and the weight of my sister's stare still pressing in from across the room, I felt the same clarity I'd felt back then. The rules hadn't changed. The setting had. I checked my watch, then glanced toward the doors where the event staff were guiding people inside. The man who'd spoken to me earlier caught my eye and gave a brief nod. Efficient, on schedule. Behind me, my sister's voice rose again, sharper now, trying to regain control of something she'd lost without realizing it. I didn't turn around. I stepped forward instead, moving with the flow of the room, letting the past stay exactly where it belonged, while the present kept moving. I moved with the crowd toward the ballroom doors. The noise tightening as people funneled into a narrower space, and the memory came back the way it always did, without warning, without asking permission. I was 18 and sitting on the floor of my bedroom, back against the bed laptop balanced on my knees. The screen was crowded with code comments stacked, tight files open in a way that would have looked chaotic to anyone else. To me, it was clean. Everything was where it needed to be. I'd spent months getting it there. The competition deadline was close enough to feel. State level officially sanctioned, the kind that actually mattered. The rules were strict. Original work. Clean documentation. One submission. No do-overs. I wasn't chasing attention. I was chasing leverage. A result that could stand on its own, independent of anyone's opinion. I'd built the project to solve a real problem. Data handling security gaps, access control, nothing theoretical. I tested it the way I'd learned to test everything, break it, patch it, break it again. When it finally held, I slept for 3 hours and woke up to run one last check. That was the morning my sister walked into my room without knocking. She had a glass in her hand. Dark liquid. Juice or wine, I never knew which. She was talking before she fully stepped inside, complaining about something trivial, something that already felt loud in a room that needed quiet. I remember saying her name once, just once. She tripped. That's the word everyone used later. Tripped. The glass tipped. The liquid poured straight into the side vent of my laptop. It didn't splash. It soaked. There was a sound, short, sharp, unmistakable, and then the screen went black. I didn't scream. I didn't shove her. I just sat there staring at a reflection where my work had been a second earlier. She froze, then she started crying. My parents arrived almost immediately. My mother went straight to her arms, already out, voice soft and urgent. My father stood in the doorway and looked past me, as if the laptop wasn't even there. She didn't mean it, my mother kept saying. It was an accident. I picked up the machine carefully, like it might still be salvageable if I didn't move too fast. Liquid dripped from the casing onto the carpet. There was a competition, I said. My voice sounded steady, distant. The submission. My father cut me off. Not now. I tried to explain. What was on the drive? How much time it represented? What it meant? No one asked a single question. No one asked if I had backups. No one asked what the project was for. My sister sobbed louder. The room rearranged itself around her. At some point, my father's expression changed. Not anger, resolution. You need to calm down, he said. I'm calm, I said. He shook his head. You're making this worse. I opened the laptop casing with shaking hands and pulled the drive. It was warm. Wet. I already knew. I still tried. Drying it, cleaning it, powering it on with a different machine. Nothing responded. The data was gone. Something in me shifted then. Not grief, recognition. I raised my voice. Not at my sister, at the room. Years of being background noise came out all at once, sharp and uncontrolled. I said things I hadn't planned to say. Things that had been waiting. My sister cried harder. My mother turned on me like I'd done something unforgivable. That's enough, my father said. He didn't tell her to leave. He didn't tell me to sit. He walked past me, grabbed a bag from the closet, and started throwing my things into it. Clothes, books, chargers, whatever his hand landed on first. I stood there watching the ruined drive still in my palm. You're 18, he said. If you think you're so capable, figure it out. He carried the bag outside and dropped it on the lawn. The sound was dull. Final. I looked around the room once. Nothing in it belonged to me in the way that mattered anymore. I left without saying goodbye. No one followed. No one stopped me. I walked until the streetlights thinned out and the neighborhood quieted. I checked my wallet. $42. That was it. My phone was half charged. My bag was heavier than it should have been. I sat on a curb and stared at the hard drive in my hand like it might change its mind. It didn't. I spent that night on a friend's couch and the next few weeks in places that felt temporary because they were. I worked whatever hours I could get. I borrowed computers. I rewrote what I remembered, not because it would help with the competition I'd missed that window, but because it was the only way I knew how to keep moving. I didn't go back to the house, not to argue, not to ask for help. The decision had already been made for me. All that was left was choosing what to do with it. The military wasn't an escape. It was a calculation, structure, training, a place where ability showed up on paper instead of at a dinner table. I talked to a recruiter, asked specific questions, read everything they handed me, took the tests. When I signed the paperwork, no one clapped. No one framed the document. That was fine. Standing at the edge of the ballroom, now years later, I felt that same sense of finality settle in, not heavy, just precise. The doors opened wider, music spilling out, people stepping forward, as if nothing important had happened. I slipped the ruined drive from memory back where it belonged and walked inside with everyone else. My pace steady, my hands free, carrying only what still worked. The ballroom lights were brighter than the hallway, and for a second, my eyes adjusted while my body did what it had learned to do, find the edges. Note the exits, keep moving without rushing. That habit didn't start here. It started the first morning I stood on a painted line and realized no one cared who my family was. I didn't join the military because I had nowhere else to go. I joined because I wanted a place where performance showed up in writing, where expectations were clear, where you didn't have to justify your interest before you were allowed to use it. The recruiter's office smelled like old carpet and coffee. I remember sitting across from him and asking questions that surprised him. Not about bonuses, not about travel, about training pipelines, clearance timelines, and how skills were measured once you were in. He slid pamphlets across the desk. I read them instead of nodding. You sure about cyber? He asked. It's not glamorous. That's fine, I said. I'm not either. The tests came first, then more tests. Aptitude screens, background forms, physicals. Nothing about it felt personal. That was the appeal. When I passed, no one congratulated my parents. When I missed a question, no one explained it away. The results sat where everyone could see them. Training stripped away a lot of noise. Days were simple. Wake up. Do the work. Learn the systems. Fail fast. Fix it. Repeat. There was no space for backstories, no room for excuses. If something didn't work, you owned it. If it did, you moved on. I gravitated toward the parts most people avoided. The dull checks, the logs no one wanted to read. The moments where nothing dramatic happened and everything depended on that. I learned how small vulnerabilities stacked, how one ignored update turned into a locked system, how people blamed tools when they were really ignoring procedures. No one laughed when I stayed late to test something again. No one told me it was just a hobby. By the time I finished advanced training, I knew exactly where I fit. Not because someone told me, because the work did. The first time I was assigned to a medical systems unit, it felt familiar in a way I hadn't expected. Same environment, different rules. Hospitals ran on the assumption that nothing bad would happen. Military medicine did not. Redundancy wasn't optional. Access wasn't casual. Every change had a trail. I liked that. I learned compliance frameworks the way other people learned languages. HIPAA, NIST. The boring parts everyone skipped were the parts that mattered most. They were the difference between an inconvenience and a shutdown. I didn't talk about my family. No one asked. When people found out my background later, it was a footnote, not a definition. Outside of duty hours, I kept building. Carefully, legally, slowly. I filed the paperwork the way I'd been taught: clean, disclosed, separated from anything that could raise questions. I didn't attach my full name. I didn't put my face on anything. The company wasn't a statement, it was a tool. The work came in through other firms at first, small clinics that didn't understand why their systems kept failing. Regional vendors who needed someone to clean up messes without becoming the story. I didn't pitch big promises. I fixed what was broken and documented why. Word spread without advertising, that was the point. I stayed out of the spotlight on purpose. I didn't want recognition. I wanted leverage that didn't announce itself. Ownership that didn't need explaining. When the company grew past what I could responsibly oversee alone, I hired people who liked structure more than attention. We wrote policies that assumed mistakes would happen and planned around that. Every decision had a reason. Every reason had a paper trail. Back in the ballroom, a server passed with a tray of drinks I didn't take. The room hummed with conversations that sounded important until you listened closely. Announcements. Introductions. Promises framed as inevitabilities. Across the space, I caught my sister watching me again, trying to place something she hadn't expected. She leaned toward her fiancé, speaking quickly. He nodded, distracted, his eyes drifting back to his phone. I turned slightly, giving myself a clear line of sight to the stage and the side doors. Timing mattered. It always did. The military taught me how to wait without wasting time, how to let other people fill silence with assumptions, how to keep my posture neutral when the ground was shifting under someone else's feet. I thought about the first audit I'd led that actually mattered, the one where we found an issue no one wanted to see, because fixing it meant admitting it had been ignored. I remembered the look on the administrator's face when he realized the problem wasn't the software, it was the habit. That lesson translated everywhere. I didn't correct my sister when she dismissed what I did. I didn't interrupt her fiancé when he talked about entry-level support like it was charity. I let them finish, let the room hold their words exactly as they were. A familiar voice cut through the noise again, closer this time. Madison. I turned. The same man from earlier stood beside me, clipboard gone, expression focused. They're ready, he said. Good, I replied. As we moved toward the side corridor, I felt the weight of the room shift behind me. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of change you don't notice until it's already happened. I didn't look back. There was no reason to. Everything that needed to be in place already was. The carpet changed texture as we stepped into the side corridor, softer underfoot, the noise of the ballroom dulling behind us, and I adjusted my pace without thinking, matching his stride so the conversation could stay efficient. The company didn't start with a launch or a name anyone would remember. It started with paperwork. Articles filed cleanly. Disclosures reviewed twice. Boundaries drawn so clearly, there was no room for confusion later. I didn't want a brand. I wanted insulation. I chose a structure that didn't invite curiosity. No press, no photos, no leadership bios written like personal essays. Ownership documented, control defined, operations delegated. Everything legal, everything boring. That was the point. The first contracts came through firms that already had the relationships, regional IT vendors who were tired of being blamed for systems they didn't design. Clinics that needed someone to tell them why things kept failing without humiliating them in front of their boards. I didn't pitch vision. I sent assessments. Most of the problems were the same. Shared passwords, outdated terminals, software patched when convenient, not when necessary. Access granted because someone asked nicely. It wasn't malice, it was habit. We fixed what could be fixed quietly and documented what couldn't. We wrote reports no one wanted to read until something went wrong. We built controls that assumed someone would click the wrong thing eventually, because they would. I stayed out of daily operations. That wasn't humility, it was compliance. I set the rules and hired people who followed them without needing applause. When the work grew beyond what a small team could handle, I expanded carefully, adding capacity without changing posture. Every hire signed the same agreements. Every vendor relationship had the same expectations. No shortcuts, no favors. If someone asked for one, we declined politely and logged the request. I didn't use my rank. I didn't use my uniform. I didn't hint. The work stood on its own, or it didn't stand at all. By the time hospitals started calling directly, most of them didn't realize they were already using our systems. We were a line item in contracts they skimmed. A licensed component buried between hardware serial numbers and service codes. That anonymity wasn't accidental. It protected everyone involved. It also protected me. In the corridor, the man beside me stopped at a set of doors and glanced at his watch. 2 minutes, he said. They're wrapping up. Understood. He nodded and stepped away, already pulling out his phone. I leaned against the wall and let my shoulders settle. This was the part I preferred. The space before decisions. The quiet where everything you've prepared either holds or doesn't. Across the hall, a glass panel reflected movement from the ballroom. I caught a partial glimpse of my sister pacing near the edge of the crowd, phone in hand. Now her confidence rearranging itself into something sharper. Her fiancé stood a step behind her, eyes down, scrolling again. I'd seen that posture before. Not in my family. In administrators who were about to realize a report they ignored mattered. The company scaled because it didn't chase attention. Teaching hospitals came next, not because we advertised, but because nothing broke after we arrived. Downtime dropped. Incidents got smaller before they got public. When problems did surface, there was a log that explained why, and a fix already scheduled. I learned early that credibility compounds faster than marketing. The board structure stayed simple. Clear votes, clear authority. I didn't sit in meetings unless I needed to. When I did, it was brief, focused, decisions documented and executed without ceremony. The CEO we brought in understood that rhythm immediately. He didn't need to be visible either. He needed to be consistent. That consistency mattered when the contracts got larger. State-level work doesn't care about personalities. It cares about compliance and continuity. About whether systems will hold when no one is watching. Our documentation spoke for itself. Our incident history was boring. That's the highest compliment in this field. I didn't tell my family any of this. Not out of secrecy, out of irrelevance. They weren't part of the calculation. The doors at the end of the corridor opened, and a few people filtered out, voices low, expressions neutral. The man returned and gestured. We're ready. Inside, the room was smaller than the ballroom, but felt heavier. Screens on the wall displayed timelines and status summaries. No one smiled for long. This wasn't a place where impressions lasted longer than performance. We took seats. The conversation moved the way it always did. Direct, measured, questions answered without adjectives. When someone mentioned the upcoming public announcement, I nodded once and moved on. Halfway through, a name surfaced. Not mine. My sister's fiancé's company. A partner on a secondary integration layer. Someone asked about staffing readiness. They're new, one of the coordinators said, still onboarding. Then they'll follow the standard path, I replied. No exceptions. There was a brief pause. then agreement. Notes taken, decision logged. No one looked at me twice. When we stood, the man who'd brought me in earlier gave a short smile. "Good timing tonight." "Timing is just preparation," I said. He nodded, accepting that as sufficient. Back in the corridor, the noise from the ballroom had shifted. Louder now. A little frantic. I stepped through the doors and felt it immediately. Conversations breaking off mid-sentence. Glances snapping back. A ripple that hadn't been there before. My sister spotted me again. Her expression tightened. She took a step forward, then stopped, recalibrating. Her fiancé's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked at the screen and then at me, like he was checking two pieces of information against each other. I walked past them, without stopping, heading toward the refreshment table, again my path deliberate but unhurried. On the table, the business card still sat where I'd left it, logo facing up, edges crisp. I picked it up and slid it back into my pocket. Not because I needed it, but because it belonged there. Across the room, someone laughed too loudly. Someone else raised a glass. The event moved on the way it always did, even as a few people stood very still, waiting for something to resolve itself. I took a breath, checked my watch, and turned slightly toward the center of the room, letting the space do what it was already doing without me pushing it along. I checked my watch again and shifted my weight, letting the room settle into its own rhythm while I stayed exactly where I was. That balance, present but not reactive, had taken years to learn, and it showed up everywhere outside this ballroom. My life didn't rebuild itself all at once. It stabilized in pieces. Quiet ones. The kind you don't announce. The first thing I protected was my time. In the military, schedules are fixed, but what you do inside them still matters. I learned to draw lines early. Duty hours stayed clean. Outside of them, I worked deliberately, not frantically. No late-night heroics, no burnout disguised as commitment. If something couldn't be done right, it waited. That approach carried over into everything else. I met my husband during a compliance review that dragged longer than anyone wanted. He was there for a different reason, sitting 2 rows back, taking notes without speaking. When we talked later, it wasn't about work. It was about boundaries. What you let people assume, what you correct, what you ignore. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. Our relationship worked because neither of us tried to fold the other into a story that already existed. There was no expectation that I would soften what I did or explain it in a way that made someone else comfortable. There was no pressure to reconnect with people I'd already stepped away from. That clarity mattered more than chemistry. When we married, we didn't invite my family. Not out of spite, out of accuracy. They weren't part of my life anymore, and pretending otherwise felt dishonest. The day went exactly as planned, small, uncomplicated, real. Having a child changed my sense of scale, not my sense of self. I became more precise, not more sentimental. I planned better. I documented everything. I thought about systems in terms of continuity, not just performance. What happens if someone else has to step in? What holds when I'm not there? That thinking fed back into my work. The company matured alongside my life. Processes tightened, reporting improved. We stopped accepting certain types of clients, not because they paid poorly, but because they refused to follow protocols. Every just this once exception created more work later. I'd seen how that ended. The military reinforced that discipline. The best operations weren't dramatic. They were uneventful. You did the work, verified it, and went home on time. If something went wrong, it wasn't because someone hadn't cared. It was because someone hadn't planned. I didn't think about my family much during those years. There was no ritual of avoidance. They simply didn't come up. When people asked about them, I answered briefly and moved on. The past didn't need defending. That distance made moments like this one stand out more sharply. Across the ballroom, my sister had stopped pacing. She stood near a column now, phone pressed to her palm, like it might give her instructions if she stared long enough. Her fiancé kept glancing between the screen and the crowd, recalibrating his posture with every new piece of information he found. I recognized that look, the moment when confidence loses its script. My parents stayed close to the perimeter, scanning faces, trying to understand why the room felt different without being able to name it. They were used to environments where their roles were clear. This wasn't one of them. I turned away and focused on the conversations within reach. Someone mentioned staffing shortages. Someone else complained about audits. The same concerns recycled in different words. I listened, contributed when it was useful, and disengaged when it wasn't. This was the version of stability I'd built. Not comfort, control. A notification buzzed against my wrist. A status update. Everything green, no surprises. I dismissed it without slowing my pace. When you live this way long enough, you stop needing validation. You stop needing to be seen. Results become the only language you trust. That's what my family never understood. They measured worth by visibility, titles, invitations. I measured it by what held up when no one was watching. The irony didn't escape me as I caught my sister's eye again. She looked away first. Someone approached from my left, introducing themselves with a practiced smile. We exchanged a few sentences. Nothing personal, everything efficient. That was fine. The night didn't belong to any one interaction. Near the bar, laughter spiked, then dropped the way it does when a conversation tips too far and someone pulls it back. I took a glass of water and sipped, grounding myself in the moment without anchoring to it. I thought briefly about my daughter at home, probably asleep by now, stuffed animal wedged under her arm, in a way she insisted was comfortable. That image carried weight, but not the kind that slowed me down. It reminded me why I chose stability over spectacle. Behind me, a voice cut through the hum, sharp enough to turn heads. Madison. I didn't turn immediately. I finished the thought I was in the middle of and nodded once to the person I'd been speaking with. Then I faced my sister. Up close, the confidence she'd worn earlier had thinned. She smiled anyway, the expression practiced but off-timing the way it gets when someone is guessing. "Can we talk?" she asked. "About what I said." She hesitated. "Just us." I considered it. Not emotionally, logistically. "Now isn't the right time," I said. "And I don't think you want the conversation you're asking for." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She glanced back at our parents who were watching carefully now and then at her fiancé, who was still pretending to read something important on his phone. "This is embarrassing," she said, lowering her voice. "You didn't have to do this." "I didn't do anything," I replied. "You did." Her face flushed. "You could have said something." "I did," I said, "years ago." She looked like she might argue, then stopped. The words didn't line up the way she wanted them to. A man passed behind us, greeting me by name, with an easy familiarity. My sister flinched at the sound of it. I took a small step back, not retreating, just resetting the distance. "I need to get back," I said. She stood there as I turned away, her confusion hardening into something quieter, more dangerous. Not anger, uncertainty. I rejoined the flow of the room, my pace steady, my attention forward. The life I'd built didn't need defending, and it didn't pause for unresolved reactions. It kept moving the way it always had, carrying only what was necessary, and leaving the rest exactly where it stood. I felt the space behind me tighten as I stepped back into the flow of the room, the kind of shift you notice in your shoulders before you register it anywhere else. Someone had said my name again, not loudly, just clearly enough to land where it needed to. A few heads turned, then a few more. I kept walking. Near the edge of the ballroom, my sister's fiancé stopped pretending to read whatever was on his phone. He lifted his head, eyes tracking me with a focus that hadn't been there before. He took 2 steps, then slowed, recalculating his approach, like he was trying to decide whether confidence or caution would serve him better. "Hey," he said, catching up. "Quick question." I stopped beside a tall cocktail table and turned to face him. "Sure." My sister hovered a few feet away, close enough to listen, far enough to deny it later. Our parents were still watching from their chosen vantage point, expressions neutral but alert, like people waiting for instructions they didn't realize they needed. "You said earlier you work in cybersecurity." He began, lowering his voice. "What company was that again?" I let the pause stretch just long enough to be noticeable. "Not dramatic, accurate." "The one on your card," I said. He frowned. "No, I mean your personal company, the smaller one." "That is my company." His mouth twitched. He nodded like that made sense, then stopped nodding when it didn't. "Right. I just want to make sure I've got the name correct before I talk to leadership." My sister stepped closer. "Why does that matter?" He waved a hand without looking at her. "Because it does." He turned back to me. "Last name, Turner." He typed it in. His thumb moved quickly, confident. Then he paused. Scrolled. Cleared the search, and tried again, adding filters this time. The screen reflected faintly in his glasses. Nothing useful came up. My sister let out a breath that sounded like relief. See? He didn't answer. He stared at the screen, jaw tightening, then deleted the entry and typed something else, slower, more deliberate. Initial, last name. The change in his face wasn't sudden. It unfolded in stages. First confusion, then recognition, then something like disbelief settling in behind his eyes. He stopped scrolling. My sister leaned in. "What are you looking at?" He angled the phone away from her for half a second, then turned it back, as if transparency might help him process it faster. Her smile faltered. "That's not." "It's verified," he said quietly. Our parents stepped closer now, drawn in by the shift in tone. My father frowned. "What is this?" Her fiancé swallowed. The founder, majority owner. My mother's lips pressed together. Of what? He looked up at me, searching my face like he expected a tell. "This is you." "Yes," I said. My sister laughed once, sharp and brittle. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." She shook her head. "Anyone can put anything online." He scrolled again, slower this time. Board listings, licenses, filings, a timeline that didn't rely on opinions. "This isn't just online," he said. "This is public record." My father stepped forward, his voice firm in the way he used when he expected it to settle things. "You're telling me my daughter owns—" "I'm telling you," her fiancé cut in, then stopped himself glancing at my father, "that she owns controlling interest in the firm we partner with." Silence spread outward from our small circle, not because anyone announced it, but because people nearby sensed something had changed. Conversations dulled. Laughter thinned. Someone a few feet away pretended not to listen while listening very carefully. My sister's face flushed. "You could have said something." "I did," I said. "You just didn't ask." "That's manipulative," she snapped. "No," I replied. "It's accurate." Her fiancé looked down at the business card in his hand, like it had betrayed him. "I offered you an entry-level position." "Yes," I said. "In my company." "In a company you work for," I corrected. He winced at that. "I spoke for you." "You assumed I said." "There's a difference." My mother found her voice. "This is inappropriate. You embarrassed us." "I didn't bring this up," I said. "He did." As if summoned by the words, a familiar presence stepped into the edge of the circle. The man from earlier, no clipboard this time, smiled with the kind of ease that came from knowing where he stood. "Madison," he said, offering his hand. "Good to see you again." I shook it. "Likewise." He glanced around, registering faces, the phone still open, the card still clenched. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No," I said. "We were clarifying something." He nodded. "Good timing, then." He turned slightly, so his voice carried just enough. "We're ready to finalize whenever you are." The review cleared this morning. My sister's fiancé froze. My parents didn't speak. The man continued unaware or unconcerned with the effect he was having. State leadership was impressed. Clean documentation. Quiet rollout. Exactly what we needed. "Happy to hear it," I said. He smiled. "I'll see you inside." When he walked away, the space around us felt exposed, like a curtain had been pulled back without anyone agreeing to it. My sister stared at me, searching for anger, triumph, anything she could latch onto. I gave her nothing. "This is unbelievable," she said. "It's documented," I replied. Her fiancé's voice dropped. "I put your name forward, for support." "Yes," I said again. "You did. And you let me. I didn't stop you." He looked like he might argue, then seemed to realize there was no version of that conversation that ended well. He slipped the phone into his pocket posture, tightening eyes, darting to the edges of the room, where a few people had stopped pretending. My father cleared his throat. "We should talk about this privately." "There's nothing private about public filings," I said. My mother stepped in front of him, her expression controlled but strained. "We raised you." "You raised one of us," I said. "The rest of this happened anyway." A murmur rolled through the room as someone called for attention near the stage. The program was moving on indifferent to our moment. My sister took a step toward me, then stopped as if an invisible line had appeared between us. "You planned this." "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." Her fiancé exhaled slowly, like he was bracing for impact that had already arrived. "I need to go," he muttered. Not to anyone in particular. He turned and walked toward the center of the room, shoulder-squared face set, the look of someone recalculating faster than he could admit. My sister watched him go, then looked back at me, eyes glossy but sharp. "You didn't have to make it public." I didn't, I said. I let it be accurate. I stepped away before she could respond. Not retreating, just rejoining the current of the event as it carried on. The lights dimmed slightly. Music swelled. Applause broke out for something unrelated and entirely on schedule. I adjusted my sleeve, checked my watch, and moved toward the aisle that led to the next obligation. The room rearranging itself behind me without asking for permission. Applause rolled through the ballroom as the lights dimmed another notch, and I let it wash past me while I stepped into the aisle, the sound flattening into background noise, the way it always did once something more concrete took over. I hadn't gone far when someone touched my elbow. Not urgently, precisely. Madison, a voice said low and familiar. One moment. I turned. The state health secretary stood beside me now. No name badge, no attempt at blending in. He didn't need one. People moved around him without being told to. Of course, I said. He gestured toward a quieter section near the wall, where a small cluster of administrators waited, tablets in hand, posture attentive. As we walked, conversations nearby thinned then stopped altogether. Not because anyone announced us. Because attention follows authority, whether people want it to or not. I wanted to thank you in person, he said, as we reached the group. What your team did with the compliance transition saved us months. Happy to help, I replied. One of the administrators nodded. Most vendors panic when timelines tighten. You didn't. We planned for that, I said. The secretary smiled briefly, then turned slightly so his voice carried just enough to reach the people who were now pretending not to listen. The contract has been approved. Statewide rollout. Effective immediately. There it was, plain, unembellished. A ripple moved through the room. I felt it before I saw it. People straightening, heads turning, phones coming out without anyone realizing they'd done it. Congratulations, he continued. This sets a new baseline. Thank you, I said. He glanced past me, noticing the tension still hanging near the center of the ballroom. Everything all right over there? Just family, I replied. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Ah, he didn't ask more. He didn't need to. I'll see you inside, he said, already stepping away. As he moved off, the space he'd occupied didn't close back up the way normal conversations did. It stayed open like the room itself was holding its breath. I turned and found my sister frozen a few yards away. Her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and calculation. Our parents stood behind her now, close enough to feel implicated, far enough to pretend they weren't. Her fiancé was still there too, posture rigid, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor like it might offer instructions. My mother recovered first. She always did. Statewide, she asked, voice controlled. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, I said. My father cleared his throat. You're saying? I'm saying the systems we've been discussing tonight are now standardized, I replied. Across the state, a few people nearby didn't bother hiding their interest anymore. This was better than whatever had been scheduled on stage. My sister shook her head slowly. This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and— I didn't walk in, I said. I was invited. Her fiancé finally looked up. I didn't know, he said, not defensively, flatly. That's correct, I replied. You let me talk like that, he added. I let you talk, I said. You chose the word. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice. This didn't need to happen like this. It happened like this because this is how systems work, I said. They don't adjust to feelings. My father's face tightened. You always had a problem with authority. I met his gaze. No. I have a problem with assumptions. The program on stage resumed, a keynote speaker taking the microphone, but the room wasn't fully with him anymore. Too many side conversations had ignited at once. The energy had shifted, and it wasn't coming back easily. My sister crossed her arms. So what now? She asked, trying for defiance and landing somewhere closer to confusion. Now, I said, the event continues. She scoffed. You're enjoying this. I'm working. I replied. Her fiancé ran a hand through his hair, eyes darting as he took in the attention he hadn't expected. I need to talk to someone, he muttered, already half turned away. About what my sister asked. About my role, he said. About what I said. He didn't wait for her response. He walked toward the cluster of administrators near the stage posture, stiff steps measured. The look of someone trying to correct course without admitting he'd misread the map. My sister watched him go, then turned back to me. Anger finally surfacing. now that disbelief had worn off. "You could have warned us. I didn't know you were still ignoring things I said." "That's not on me." My mother's voice cracked just slightly. "We're your family. You're people who made choices," I replied. "So did I." The room pulsed again as another announcement drew attention back to the stage. The secretary reappeared briefly, exchanging a few words with someone important enough to make others step aside. I felt the pull of obligation tug at me, light but insistent. This was still a work event. There were conversations that needed finishing. "I need to go," I said. My sister opened her mouth, then stopped. Whatever she'd planned to say didn't fit the moment anymore. As I stepped away, someone called my name again, congratulating me loudly enough for half the room to hear. Another person joined in, then another. Not applause, recognition, the kind that doesn't ask permission. I nodded, responded when appropriate, kept moving. Behind me, my parents stood very still, the reality of the room rearranging itself around them. They'd built their sense of importance on familiarity. Tonight had taken that away. Near the edge of the ballroom, I paused long enough to take a sip of water and steady my breath. Everything felt aligned. Not triumphant. Correct. A staff member leaned in to remind me of the schedule. I thanked her and followed as she led me toward a side door I hadn't noticed earlier. As we walked, the noise softened again, replaced by the low hum of logistics. The part of the night where decisions mattered more than reactions. Somewhere behind me, voices rose and fell as people tried to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. I didn't slow down to listen. The system had already spoken clearly enough. I adjusted my jacket, squared my shoulders, and stepped through the door as the music swelled again. The room continuing without waiting for anyone to catch up. The side door closed behind me with a soft latch, and the hum shifted from music to ventilation, the sound of people doing work without an audience. I followed the hallway down to a quieter junction, checked my phone once, and kept walking. 2 weeks passed without anything remarkable happening, which was exactly how it should have been. Then my assistant marked an email urgent. I didn't open it right away. I logged into the dashboard first. That habit had saved me more time than any notification ever had. One panel was already flashing amber. A clinic ID scrolled across the screen, followed by timestamps that stacked too neatly to be accidental. Failed authentication attempts. Repeated retries. A lock triggered exactly when it was designed to trigger. The system wasn't confused. It was responding. I clicked into the details. Access suspended, patient records inaccessible, scheduling frozen, billing halted mid-cycle. The address was familiar. I closed the panel and opened the email. It wasn't from my parents. It was from a regional IT firm, the one their clinic had been using for years. The message was cautious, almost apologetic, like someone who knew they were standing on thin ice. They asked if we were aware of an incident affecting one of our licensed environments. They asked if this was expected behavior. They asked if we could advise. I didn't reply. By the end of the day, 2 more messages came in. A medical supply vendor asking why orders were failing. A hospital administrator who worked nearby asking quietly if I'd heard anything. The pattern was consistent. Systems built on assumptions don't fail loudly at first. They stall. I let it stall. The next morning, security checked 3 visitors into my office. My assistant knocked once. "Your family is here." "Send them in," I said. They entered together like they'd rehearsed it. My mother first, posture tight. My father close behind, eyes already scanning the room for leverage. My sister last glancing at the glass walls, the desk, the view, as if the space itself might explain something. No one sat until I did. My father spoke first. "We need help." My mother jumped in before the sentence could settle. "Our systems are completely down. Patients can't be seen. Records are locked. They're talking about reporting requirements." I waited. My sister's voice wavered. "They're saying accreditation could be affected." I folded my hands. "Yes." My father frowned. "Yes. Yes," I said. "That's how it works." My mother leaned forward. "We didn't know about the licensing lapse." "You were notified," I replied, multiple times. She shook her head. "We meant to fix it." I glanced at the clock on the wall. "Intent doesn't extend access." My sister cut in. "This is an attack." "It's enforcement," I said. "There's a difference." They exchanged looks, the kind that tries to assign blame without saying it out loud. We've been with the same IT firm for years, my father said. They handle this. They handle your logo, I replied. Not your obligations. My mother's voice softened. We wouldn't be here if we had another option. You do, I said. Several. Not like this, my father snapped. I let the silence do the work. Finally, my mother tried again. We're your parents. I met her eyes. You're the owners of a clinic that ignored compliance requirements. My sister stood up. If the clinic shuts down my residency, that's not my responsibility, I said. She stared at me shocked, like the sentence had crossed a line she didn't think I'd draw. My father leaned forward, palms on the desk. You don't understand what this will do to us. I understand exactly what it will do, I replied. My mother clasped her hands together. We raised you. I didn't respond. The room stayed quiet long enough for the air system to cycle. Then I reached for the folder on my desk and slid it across the surface. My mother opened it first. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her face tightened. What is this, she asked. A purchase agreement, I said. My company will acquire the clinic. My father snatched the folder and flipped through it faster. This valuation is accurate, I said, given your exposure. My sister leaned in. You're buying it? Yes. My mother shook her head. For this price, that's what it's worth today, I said. Tomorrow it will be less. My father's jaw clenched. And if we don't sign, then I don't intervene, I said. The systems remain locked. Regulators step in. Outcomes proceed without me. My sister's voice rose. You're forcing us. I'm presenting options, I replied. My mother read further. What happens to us? You retire, I said. Immediately. My father stiffened. You can't. You will, I said. It's non-negotiable. My sister flipped to the final pages, and me. I looked at her. Your program director will formalize a transfer. Her face strained. Transfer where? A rural hospital, I said. Short on residents, very motivated to stay compliant. That's punishment, she said. It's placement, I replied. My mother's voice cracked. You're tearing this family apart. There hasn't been a family in a long time, I said. My father leaned back slowly. You planned this. I prepared, I said. There's a difference. The room went quiet again. My mother closed the folder, hands shaking. If we sign, you fix the systems. Immediately after, I said. My sister stood pacing once before stopping. This ruins me. No, I said. It recalibrates you. My father rubbed his face. We don't have a choice. My mother picked up at the pen, hesitated, then signed. My father followed. My sister stared at the line for a long moment. Before adding her name, the ink slightly uneven. I pressed the button on my desk. Execute the response plan. My assistant nodded and left. My mother exhaled long and thin. So that's it. Yes, I said. They stood slowly, movements careful, like the floor might shift if they moved too fast. At the door, my father paused. You always were stubborn, he said. I didn't answer. They left without looking back. I glanced at the dashboard as it updated access restoring queues, clearing alerts, resolving in the order they'd been designed to resolve. Outside the office, phones rang. Schedules unlocked. The clinic resumed quieter now, under rules it could no longer ignore. I closed the folder, set it back in its place, and checked the time, already aligning the rest of the day without changing my pace. I stood as the dashboard finished its last refresh, the green indicators settling into a pattern that meant the work was holding, and I picked up my phone to silence a notification before it could ring. By the time I reached the parking garage, the sun had shifted just enough to throw long lines across the concrete. I drove home without music, letting the day unwind in the order it wanted to. Nothing felt dramatic. That was the point. At home, the kitchen light was on. My husband had left a note on the counter, pickup time, dinner plan, a reminder about a permission slip. Normal things. I read it once, folded it, and slid it into my pocket. The rhythm of the house didn't change because something significant had happened elsewhere. It never did. Later that night, after our daughter was asleep and the dishes were done, I checked the system one more time. Not out of anxiety, out of habit. Everything stayed where it should. Access logs clean, no new alerts. The response plan had done exactly what it was designed to do. 3 months passed. The clinic reopened under a new name and new management. The old signage came down in an afternoon. New policies went up before anyone could ask for exceptions. Staff retraining happened on schedule, attendance, mandatory excuses not accepted. The phones rang less frantically. The system stopped surprising people. My parents turned in their badges and left quietly. There was no ceremony, No farewell speech, just a handover, documented and completed. The staff adjusted faster than anyone expected. Systems tend to do that when ambiguity is removed. My sister reported to her new placement the following week. The hospital was smaller. The hours were longer. The learning curve steeper. She didn't call. I didn't expect her to. At work, the rollout continued. Another state requested a review. A hospital network asked for an assessment without the sales pitch. We declined a few contracts that didn't meet our requirements and accepted ones that did. The board met on schedule. Decisions were recorded. Nothing required my attention beyond what I'd already planned for. In uniform, the days stayed structured. Briefings started on time. Reports stayed factual. The team handled a minor incident without escalation because they'd trained for it. We logged it, closed it, and moved on. On a Tuesday morning, I took my daughter to school before heading in. She insisted on wearing mismatched socks and informed me this was intentional. I agreed. It was a good decision. When I arrived at the office later that day, lunch was waiting on my desk. My husband had dropped it off between hearings. He didn't ask questions. He never did unless I offered. We'd agreed early on that silence wasn't avoidance. It was respect. A message came in from a regional administrator thanking us for the smooth transition. I forwarded it to the team and archived it. Gratitude is nice. Stability is better. I didn't hear from my parents. I didn't look for updates. There was nothing left to negotiate. Occasionally, someone would mention the gala in passing. How strange the night had been. How unexpected. I nodded and redirected the conversation back to timelines and deliverables. Events don't matter once the systems are in place. One afternoon, weeks later, my sister's fiancé's name appeared in a routine staffing report. His leadership track had been removed as documented. His role continued. He showed up. He did the work. That was sufficient. Boundaries held. I walked through the clinic once after the transition unannounced just to see how it felt. The waiting room was quieter. The terminals logged out automatically when unattended. The staff followed procedures without needing reminders. No one recognized me, and that was exactly right. On the drive home, traffic slowed, then cleared. I took the long way, not because I needed time, but because the route made sense. That night, after the house settled again, I sat at the table with a cup of tea and reviewed the next quarter's schedule. Training cycles, maintenance windows, family plans penciled in where they belonged. Everything in its lane. Revenge would have been loud. It would have required attention. It would have demanded an audience and left things unstable afterward. This was different. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't take anything that wasn't offered legally and documented properly. I didn't humiliate anyone who hadn't already done that work themselves. I enforced boundaries and let the consequences land where the rules said they would. The system did the rest. When I turned off the light and headed upstairs, I paused at the doorway to my daughter's room. She'd kicked the blankets off again. I tucked them back in without waking her and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, just long enough to register the quiet. The life I built didn't need a final word. It didn't circle back for approval or leave loose ends on purpose. It moved forward, steady and intact, carrying only what it needed and leaving the rest where it belonged. I didn't tell this story because it ended with someone losing everything. I told it because it didn't. No shouting match, no public meltdown, just a quiet shift where systems replaced opinions and boundaries did what emotions never could. Family drama doesn't always explode. Sometimes it reveals itself in small assumptions, in who gets listened to and who gets dismissed, until the rules finally speak louder than people. In the end, this wasn't about winning. It was about building a life solid enough that no one else could shake it. If stories like this resonate with you, realistic revenge stories, slow-burn family revenge stories, and family drama that feels uncomfortably real, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you thoughtful stories where actions matter more than noise.